All right, let's get strategic, folks. Today we're taking a deep dive into your next 5 moves. Master the Art of Business Strategy by Patrick Bet-David.
Sounds intense.
It is, but in a good way. We're actually basing this deep dive on Lisi the Summarizer's YouTube breakdown of the audiobook, so major props to her for distilling all that wisdom.
Efficient, I like it. So what grabbed you right away?
Well, Bet-David argues that strategic thinking has a sweet spot. You need enough planning to avoid disaster, but you don't want to get stuck overthinking.
Makes sense. Finding that balance is key.
But get this, one of his big inspirations is, wait for it, mob bosses.
Whoa, unexpected. I'm intrigued, though.
Right. It sounds crazy at first, but trust me, it's fascinating how he connects those worlds.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does he tie in, organized crime with legitimate business strategy?
He uses those comparisons to highlight the need for a calculated long game mindset. It's about thinking several steps ahead, like a chess grandmaster.
Ah, I see. So even if our turf is the boardroom, not the streets, we can learn from that strategic approach.
Exactly. But don't worry, we'll extract the ethical and practical takeaways. No shady dealings here.
Good, because I was about to get nervous.
No need for that. You're here to help us connect those dots and make sure we understand the so what behind these strategies.
Happy to do it.
Awesome. So let's dive into Bet-David's first move, the foundation of his whole approach, knowing yourself.
Self-awareness, right. It's such a buzzword, but he seems to mean it on a deeper level.
He does. He calls self-awareness non-negotiable for strategic thinking.
Because without it,
Without it, you're just reacting to whatever comes your way. You're not shaping your own path, you're just along for the ride.
not exactly a recipe for success.
Nope. But Bet-David doesn't just throw out this vague idea of self-awareness. He actually created a tool to help people get that clarity.
Oh, interesting. What is it?
It's called the Personal Identity Audit. Apparently, over 200,000 people have used it.
Wow, that's impressive. Where can we find it?
It's in the appendix of the book if you're interested.
I'll have to check it out. What kind of stuff does it cover?
It goes way beyond surface level stuff. It really digs into your values, the things you absolutely will not compromise on your non-negotiables.
Having that level of clarity about your values is so crucial. It guides your decisions.
Bet-David even shares this story about getting passed over for a promotion because he didn't fit the corporate mold. He says it was actually a turning point for him.
It's amazing how what we might see as a setback can actually clarify our path.
Absolutely. He realized the traditional corporate ladder wasn't for him and really doubled down on his entrepreneurial journey.
I love that. That resilience, that ability to turn a negative into fuel for your goals is something we can all learn from no matter what we do.
Okay, so we've established that self-awareness is key, but then how do we actually make those tough decisions in the business world? Does Bet-David have a system, a process for that?
He does. He calls it the Solve for X methodology. It's a framework for tackling those big decisions, those make or break moments.
Lay it on me.
Well, the first step is deceptively simple, identifying the real issue.
Sounds easy enough.
It is, but we often get tripped up. We get distracted by symptoms or jump to conclusions without understanding the root cause.
So it's about taking a step back and getting to the heart of the problem.
Precisely. Imagine a company facing declining sales, right?
Happens all the time.
Instead of panicking and slashing prices, solve for X means asking, why are sales dropping in the first place? Is it marketing? Is it the product itself? Something totally different.
You have to figure out that X before you can solve for it.
And once you've identified the root cause, what comes next?
What's step 2?
Exploring all the possible options and their potential outcomes.
Okay, so you're basically playing out different scenarios in your mind.
It's like a mental chess game. You're thinking, if we do this, then that might happen. But if we choose this other path, then you're weighing the potential upsides and downsides of each move.
So it's all about being proactive, not just reacting to what life throws at you.
Exactly. But then comes step 3, and this is where it gets really tricky.
Uh-oh, I don't like the sound of that. What is it?
Detaching from the outcome. This means making the decision based on logic and reason, not on emotional attachment or what you wish would happen.
That is hard. Especially when the stakes are high, it's easy to get emotionally invested in a specific outcome.
It takes practice, no doubt. But if you're too attached to one particular result, it can cloud your judgment and lead to bad decisions.
I can see that. So you're saying we need to be like Spock, all logic and no emotion.
Not quite that extreme, but you get the idea. And finally, there's the time frame. Some decisions demand immediate action, Others require careful consideration.
Right, some fires need to be put out right away, and others you can take your time.
Understanding that urgency, that's another part of Solve for X. Okay, we've got self-awareness, a framework for decision-making. What else does Bet David emphasize?
Well, he's big on building the right team. He even says that the most brilliant individuals still need a strong team to succeed.
Ah, the power of collaboration. Everyone needs support.
He draws this interesting comparison with mob families. They have the boss, of course, but then there's the consigliere, the trusted advisor.
Like the wise old guy who gives the boss perspective and keeps them grounded.
That's the one. And Bet David says we all need someone like that in our corner, someone who's not afraid to challenge our assumptions.
Someone who can say, hey, have you thought about it this way? I like that. Challenging each other makes us stronger.
He even tells this story about an IBM executive who came to him for advice on keeping top talent. Bet David's advice: cultivate entrepreneurial people within your organization, give them ownership, empower them to innovate.
That's great advice, whether you're a scrappy startup or a giant company. Foster that innovative spirit.
So it's about fostering that right culture.
Hmm.
And he also stresses the importance of, actually walking the walk when it comes to your company values.
Meaning?
He tells this really powerful story about firing his top performing agent. This guy was bringing in tons of money, but he was also super unethical.
Wow, that's a tough call to let go of your top earner.
It was a short-term hit to his revenue, but Bet David says it was the right decision for the long-term health of his company.
So he's saying don't just talk about integrity, actually live it, even when it hurts.
Exactly. You have to be willing to walk away from a deal if it compromises your values.
Okay, I'm starting to get a feel for Bet David's approach. So we've got the self-awareness, the decision-making framework, the strong team. What's next on his roadmap?
Scaling for growth. But not just in a superficial, I'm the CEO, look at me kind of way. He gets into the nitty-gritty of what it really takes to achieve exponential growth.
Now we're talking. Growth is something I think a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses are constantly striving for. What are some of Bet David's insights on that?
Well, he actually provides 10 crucial questions to ask yourself before you even think about raising capital.
Before you go looking for funding, why is that?
He says it's about being prepared for that next level, not just chasing money for the sake of it.
Smart. So what kind of questions are we talking about?
One of them is, do you have a proven track record of hitting your goals? If not, maybe seeking investment is premature.
Makes sense. You need to show you can deliver.
He also tells this story about Jack Ma's pitch to SoftBank, which ended up securing funding for Alibaba.
Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba.
Yep. And apparently, Ma didn't focus on traditional revenue models.
So what did he focus on?
He connected with them on a shared vision for the future.
It's about selling the dream, but in a way that's grounded in reality.
Exactly. And to manage that balance between vision and execution, Bet David introduces the strategy dashboard.
And another framework. Hit me with it.
Think of it as a visual tool that helps you balance those short-term tasks, those 90-day goals, the long-term visions, and even those what-if scenarios that could shake things up.
So it's a way to keep all the balls in the air, not just get lost in the day-to-day.
Exactly. He wants us to see the whole picture, make sure all those pieces are working together.
I like that. Having that holistic view is so important. So where does the mob boss mentality come back in?
Well, he actually draws a parallel between motivating employees and Bill Belichick's coaching style.
Wait, the famously intense football coach. What does he have to do with business?
Bet David argues that it's about setting high expectations and pushing people to reach their full potential, creating that culture of excellence.
Pushing people to be their best, I get that. But I also know some people really don't respond well to that kind of pressure.
He acknowledges that. This style definitely isn't for everyone, but for some people that pressure can be transformative.
So knowing your team, knowing what motivates each individual is crucial.
He's all about tailoring your approach accordingly. You can't force someone to be motivated by something they're not.
It's about understanding their drivers and then providing the support and resources they need to succeed.
Okay, so far we've covered self-awareness, a decision-making framework, building a strong team, and scaling for growth. But there's one more piece of Bet David's strategy that I think we need to unpack.
Let's hear it.
It's his concept of power plays. This is where those mob boss comparisons really come into play.
All right, I'm ready for some strategic maneuvering. But ethically, of course.
Of course. So Bet David defines power plays as strategic moves to gain an advantage, especially when you're up against bigger, more established competition.
The classic David and Goliath scenario. How do we take on those giants?
Well, one key element he learned from studying figures like Sammy the Bull Gravano, a notorious mobster,
He really did his research?
is the importance of controlling the narrative.
Meaning,
Bet David realized that even when facing bad press or rumors, he could shape public perception, especially through social media. It's about taking control of your own story.
so you're saying that we can't just sit back and let others define us. We need to proactively shape our own message.
He says, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And that story might not be the one you want out there.
Makes sense. So controlling the narrative is one power play. What else?
But he doesn't just stop there. He also stresses the importance of authenticity and vulnerability.
Wait, vulnerability. In the business world, isn't that seen as a weakness?
It's counterintuitive, right? But David argues that sharing your mistakes, your challenges, it makes you more relatable. People connect with realness.
I can see that. It humanizes you, makes you more approachable.
He says it's about taking off that mask of perfection and showing your true self.
Because, let's be honest, no one's perfect. We all make mistakes. So instead of hiding them, we should own them.
That's what he's saying. And it goes beyond just sharing your struggles. He also encourages actually challenging your audience's viewpoints.
Actively seeking out different perspectives. Interesting.
He says it creates engagement, builds a community around your brand. People feel like they're part of the conversation.
So it's not just about broadcasting your message, it's about creating a dialogue, a back and forth.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got controlling the narrative, being authentic, engaging your audience. What other power plays are up Bet David's sleeve?
I'm ready for more.
He uses this anecdote about Michael Franzese.
Another mobster.
Yeah, Franzese was known as the Yuppie Don, and he was famous for meticulously planning for those high-stakes meetings, like down to the smallest detail.
What kind of details are we talking about?
Bet David says Franzese would even try to walk in his opponent's shoes, try to understand their motivations so he could anticipate their every move.
Wow, that's some next-level preparation.
Right. It sounds intense, but Bet David argues that we can all benefit from that level of strategic thinking.
So whether we're negotiating a deal, giving a presentation, or even just having a difficult conversation, we should be thinking through those different perspectives and those potential outcomes.
It's not about being paranoid. It's about being prepared.
I like that. And being flexible, too. Because no matter how much we plan, things rarely go exactly as we expect.
Okay, we've covered controlling the narrative, preparing like a mob boss. What else does Bet David emphasize in terms of power plays?
Give me the goods.
He's big on the long game of relationships, and he encourages us to shift our mindset. Instead of approaching connections with that "what can you do for me" attitude.
Which, let's be honest, a lot of networking can feel like that. What's his alternative?
He says we should approach relationships with a genuine desire to help others.
So, building those connections based on mutual benefit and trust.
He believes those relationships will pay off in the long run, even if you don't see an immediate return.
It's about planting seeds that will grow into something bigger down the road.
Exactly. And he tells this story about how going out of his way to help a friend's son who was incarcerated
Wow, that's going above and beyond.
eventually led to a multi-million-dollar business opportunity years later.
No kidding.
It really underscores the idea that sometimes the most strategic move is simply to be a good person.
You know, I think that's something people often forget. Kindness and generosity aren't just good for the soul, they can actually be good for business too.
I'm really liking Bet David's approach. It's not just about business tactics, it's about life. It's about building that foundation of self-awareness, surrounding yourself with the right people, approaching every situation with that strategic mindset.
He seems to have this holistic view of success. It's not just about the bottom line, it's about living with intentionality, making a positive impact.
And speaking of intentionality, he also dives into the importance of understanding different personality types, which is key for building a high-performing team.
Okay, this should be interesting. How does he categorize people?
He groups them based on what primarily motivates them. There are those who are driven by advancement, those who are driven by individuality, those who are driven by, get this, madness.
Madness. As in they just run around doing whatever pops into their head.
Not exactly. He uses madness to describe people who are driven by those unconventional factors, often fueled by competition or a desire to prove themselves.
So like the rebels, the ones who thrive on pushing boundaries and defying expectations.
Right. They need to be constantly challenged, given those big, hairy, audacious goals that push them outside their comfort zones.
Makes sense. Throw a challenge at them and they'll rise to the occasion.
And then, of course, there are those who are driven by purpose.
These are the ones who want to make a difference in the world.
Exactly. They're motivated by a sense of meaning, a desire to have a positive impact. They thrive in environments that align with their values.
So it's about finding the right fit, making sure their work contributes to something they believe in.
I'm already thinking about the people in my own life, trying to figure out which category they fall into.
Me too. And this is the point. By understanding those different motivations, you can manage people more effectively, position them for success, and create a win-win for everyone.
It's about recognizing that not everyone is driven by the same things and then leveraging those individual strengths.
And I imagine avoiding the trap of trying to force someone to be motivated by something that just isn't in their nature.
He uses that analogy of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Just not going to work.
And speaking of things not working, Bet David also circles back to that idea of staying battle-tested. Even when you've achieved success, you can't get complacent.
No resting on your laurels.
Exactly. He encourages us to always be thinking, what could go wrong? How can I be prepared for it?
Embrace that healthy dose of paranoia.
It's not about being afraid. It's about anticipating those challenges and being ready to pivot when necessary.
It's almost like you have to treat success as a temporary state, something you're constantly working to maintain.
Because the landscape is always changing, right? What worked yesterday might not work tomorrow.
And Bet David actually suggests a pretty unconventional approach to staying battle-tested. He says study your competitors.
Like spy on them.
Not spy necessarily, but analyze their moves. Figure out what they're doing well, what their weaknesses are.
So in a way, you can learn from your competitors, even turn them into your teachers.
By understanding their strategies, you can develop counter strategies, stay one step ahead.
I love that. Turning a rival into a resource. So it's all about that strategic thinking, constantly looking for those advantages. It's been fascinating so far. What other gems does Bet David have in store for us?
Well, he has a lot to say about building a lasting legacy, finding that true fulfillment. But before we get into all that...
Hang on. Before we move on, I want to circle back to this idea of future truth that Bet David mentioned. It really piqued my interest.
Ah, yes. Future truth. It's the idea of living in the present as if your future goals are already a reality.
It sounds a bit like manifestation or something.
It does, but with a more strategic twist. It's not just about wishing and hoping. It's about visualizing your goals so clearly that they feel almost tangible, like you can already taste that success.
So it's about shifting your mindset from, I hope this happens, to, I know this is going to happen.
And Bet David says that can be incredibly powerful for staying motivated and focused on that long-term vision.
Makes sense. But of course, it all goes back to that self-awareness we talked about earlier. If you're not clear on what you actually want, how can you visualize it as a reality?
This has been quite a deep dive so far. From self-awareness to decision-making, team building to scaling for growth, even getting some tips from, well, let's just say unexpected sources.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Bet David has a lot more to share about building a lasting legacy and finding that true fulfillment.
So buckle up, everyone. We'll be back soon with more from your next 5 moves.
I can't wait to see what else he has to teach us.
Me too. Until next time.
Keep thinking strategically. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm ready to explore more of Bet David's strategies, especially his insights on beating Goliath.
Yeah, that part of the book really got me thinking too. It's not every day you hear a business expert talking about mob bosses for inspiration.
It is pretty unexpected, right? But as we discussed earlier, Bet David isn't saying we should be breaking the law or anything. He's drawing parallels between that strategic mindset and the challenges entrepreneurs often face.
So like the classic David versus Goliath story.
Exactly. In business, those Goliaths are often those huge companies with endless resources.
Okay, so how can we, the Davids, level the playing field? How do we use this so-called mob boss mentality ethically to our advantage?
One key tactic Bet David highlights is controlling the narrative. He realized that even with negative press or rumors swirling around, you can still shape public perception, especially through social media.
That makes sense. It's like taking ownership of your story before someone else tells it for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He says if you don't tell your own story, someone else will. And that story might not be so flattering.
So it's about being proactive, not just reactive.
And it goes beyond just putting out your own message. He also stresses the importance of authenticity and vulnerability.
Hey, vulnerability, isn't that kind of risky in the business world?
It might seem counterintuitive, right? We're often told to project this image of perfection. But Bet David argues that people connect with realness. They want to see the human behind the brand.
I get that.
Yellen's perfect.
Exactly. So instead of hiding our mistakes or challenges, we should own them. Share them. It makes us relatable.
So it's about taking off that mask and showing your true self.
And it's not just about sharing your struggles either. He also encourages us to challenge our audience's viewpoints, get them thinking, ask for their input. So it's not just a one-way broadcast. It's about creating a dialogue.
Exactly. It's about building a community around your brand.
Yeah.
Bet David even uses this story about Michael Franzese.
Another mobster.
Yeah, this guy was known as the Yuppie Don. Bet David tells this story about how Franzese would spend hours preparing for those high-stakes meetings, like down to the tiniest detail.
Wow, that's intense.
Bet David says Franzese would even try to walk in his opponent's shoes, understand their motivations, so he could anticipate their every move.
Now that's strategic thinking.
It might seem a little extreme, but Bet David argues that this level of preparation can be applied to anything: business negotiations, presentations, even everyday interactions.
So it's not about being paranoid, it's about thinking things through, considering different perspectives.
And having a plan, but also being flexible enough to adapt when things inevitably change, because they always do.
So much for mob boss tactics. What else does Bet David suggest?
He talks a lot about the long game of relationships. He encourages us to shift our mindset instead of that transactional, what can you do for me approach.
Which I think a lot of people fall into, especially with networking.
He says we should approach relationships with a genuine desire to help others, to provide value.
So building those connections based on mutual benefit and trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he believes this approach isn't just ethical, it's strategically advantageous.
How so?
He tells this incredible story about how he went out of his way to help a friend's son who was in prison.
That's really kind of him.
And he didn't do it expecting anything in return. But years later, that friend, overwhelmed with gratitude, gave Bet David a list of valuable contacts. And one of those contacts led to a multi-million-dollar business opportunity.
It's amazing how generosity can come back around.
It really underscores the idea that sometimes the most strategic move is simply to be a good person.
I love that. So much of what Bet David talks about isn't just about business. It's about life. It's about building that foundation of self-awareness, surrounding yourself with the right people, approaching every situation with that strategic mindset.
He has this really holistic view of success. It's not just about money or status. It's about living in alignment with your values, making a positive impact.
And speaking of understanding people, Bet David dives into the importance of managing different personality types. That's key for building a high-performing team.
Yeah, how does he break that down?
He categorizes people based on what drives them. There are those motivated by advancement, by individuality, by, wait for it, madness.
Madness. Are we talking about actual insanity here?
Not quite. He uses madness to describe those people who are driven by those unconventional factors, like competition or a desire to prove themselves.
So they thrive on pushing boundaries, defying expectations.
Give them a challenge and they'll rise to the occasion. And then, of course, there are those who are driven by purpose.
Those are the ones who want their work to have meaning.
Exactly. They want to make a difference in the world. They need their work to align with their values.
So it's all about understanding those individual motivations.
And recognizing that you can't force someone to be motivated by something they're not. It's about playing to their strengths, creating an environment where they can thrive.
Avoiding that whole square peg, round hole scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And once you've built that dream team, Bet David reminds us that we have to stay battle-tested.
No resting on our laurels.
He encourages us to constantly be asking ourselves, what could go wrong? How can I prepare for it?
Embrace that healthy dose of paranoia.
It's not about being afraid, it's about being prepared, anticipating challenges, and being ready to pivot when things change, because they always do.
So it's about having that plan A, but also having a plan B and C and D.
And being willing to adapt.
David even suggests studying your competitors.
Like spying on them.
Not spying, exactly, but analyzing their moves, trying to understand their motivations.
So it's almost like
Okay.
treating your competitors as teachers.
By understanding their strategies, you can develop counter strategies. Stay one step ahead.
This is all making so much sense.
It's about constantly evolving, learning, refining your approach.
This deep dive has been a revelation. We've covered so much ground. From self-awareness to decision-making, from building that dream team to scaling for growth, and even getting some wisdom from those unconventional sources.
And through it all, Bet David emphasizes the importance of that strategic mindset, that willingness to challenge assumptions, and that relentless pursuit of growth.
I'm feeling inspired.
Yeah,
and a little exhausted from all this strategic thinking.
I hear you. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to this idea of future truth that Bet David mentioned.
Ah, yes, future truth.
It's the idea of living in the present as if your future goals are already a reality.
It's about making it real in your mind, visualizing it so clearly that it feels inevitable.
And Bet David argues that this can be incredibly powerful for staying motivated and focused.
It's about shifting your mindset from hoping to knowing.
But of course, it all goes back to self-awareness. If you're not clear on what you truly want, how can you possibly visualize it as a reality?
So much to think about.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more piece of the puzzle that we need to explore: Bet David's insights on building a lasting legacy and finding that true fulfillment.
I'm ready for it. Bring on the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Patrick Bet-David's Your Next 5 Moves. We've covered a lot of ground, from self-awareness and those power plays to building a dream team and even, getting a little inspiration from some unconventional places.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
And in this last part, I'm really looking forward to exploring what Bet David has to say about the long game, that idea of building a lasting legacy and finding true fulfillment.
That's something that really resonated with me throughout the book. It's not just about hitting those business targets. It's about making an impact that goes beyond ourselves.
Bet David argues that real fulfillment comes from aligning your actions with your values. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself, leaving the world a little better than you found it.
It's making a difference, not just making a profit.
He really pushes us to think deeply about the legacy we want to leave behind, both professionally and personally. What do we want to be remembered for? What impact do we want to have?
Those are big questions, and I think it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of that bigger picture.
And that's where future truth comes back in. Remember that idea we talked about? Visualizing your legacy so clearly
Yeah.
that it feels almost tangible, almost inevitable.
Right, like you can already see it happening.
That David says that kind of vivid visualization can be incredibly motivating. It helps you stay focused on that long-term vision.
So it's not just about setting goals, it's about connecting with that deeper purpose and making it feel real.
Exactly. But he also cautions us about getting caught up in the trappings of success. Losing sight of what truly matters.
I think we've all seen that happen. People who achieve great success but still seem unhappy or unfulfilled.
Right. Bet David reminds us that true happiness comes from within. It's about cultivating gratitude, appreciating the simple things, nurturing those relationships with the people we care about.
It's about finding that balance between ambition and contentment.
And it's also about never stop learning and growing. Bet David believes we should always be challenging ourselves, expanding our knowledge, striving to become better versions of ourselves.
That growth mindset idea, never settling for the status quo, always reaching for more.
And maybe most importantly, he reminds us that success isn't a destination. It's a journey.
It's about enjoying the ride even when there are bumps along the way.
Exactly. It's about savoring those wins and learning from those setbacks.
This deep dive into your next 5 moves has been amazing. We've explored Bet David's unique approach to success, drawing wisdom from all those surprising places like, mob bosses and his own experiences.
And through it all, he's given us a lot to think about. The importance of self-awareness, strategic thinking, building genuine relationships, and staying true to our values.
I'm definitely feeling inspired and ready to start putting all this into action.
Me too. I encourage everyone listening to think about their own next 5 moves. How can you apply these principles to your own life and your own work?
Remember, true success isn't just about achieving those external goals. It's about the impact you have on the world, the legacy you leave behind.
That's a powerful message to take with us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Patrick Bet-David's Your Next 5 Moves.
Until next time, keep those strategic minds sharp and never stop learning from the world around you.